So Amazon, quick thoughts, somebody saying online retail slowest ever at 12%. That's on the, maybe on the month, but I'll have to check that number.
Yeah. You want to go through what you thought about the Amazon quarter?
Yeah, I mean, it's a great quarter, obviously, on an absolute basis, kind of like you said on Twitter. It looks good, but the first time we've seen them guide revenue below street estimates in probably 6 quarters.
That's a long time.
Yeah,
that's right in line with the GDP cycle. Isn't that eerie?
Yeah. So obviously profitability is what the company's pushing right now. They got beating EBIT numbers by 70% and guiding up 50%. And so the real thing we're looking at is last 6 quarters you've seen gross profit sort of growth stable or accelerating every single of those quarters. And now we're looking at 2 or 3 quarters where it's going to be decelerating. And I think what matters here is top line and how much flow through is on gross margin. Right. And it's rate of change is what we care about. So. On an absolute basis, looks great, but we're certainly tracking how we think the next 2 quarters will flow over in terms of the actual revenue profit numbers.
Now, one way for a lot of you who are focused on the macro and the rate of change, it absolutely applies. And guess what? Guess where I got the rate of change process for macro? From bottom up. I was a bottom up buy side analyst, a bottom up, and actually followed consumer first. This is where I came up with all this stuff. Okay. It's not 100% of the time, but it's a very high batting average. If you can tell me when a high growth stock starts to slow on the top line, revenues, and guides to further slowdown, then they'll lose some of its multiple. Don't forget that Amazon's going to get a lot cheaper even if the stock doesn't go down because their earnings are going up finally. Okay? So isn't that amazing? People have been shorting it for how long because it's super expensive, and now they're going to cover their shorts because it's getting less expensive? I mean, it can blow your mind. Obviously, if you follow how people who go to business school and say, well, I'm going to short expensive stocks and buy cheap stocks. I mean, that's great. I mean, I did it too, and I didn't go to business school, and it doesn't always work. So again, you got to get the macro right. Anyway, there's a bit of a rant about that. But if you want to bring this back to reality in terms of what Jeremy just said, let's just look at Amazon here. You can get a black pen. Okay, so you got Amazon. That's not black, but whatever. Let's actually just show that what we call pod 2, which is kind of the equivalent of inflation, a proxy for inflation. Pod 2 just went straight up. That's what Jeremy just said. That's their EBIT, okay, pod 2. Pod 1, I'm definitely getting this thing colored a different color, all right? Pod 1, which is revenues, most importantly, the forward outlook is this way. So now Amazon becomes, pod 1 being revenue, pod 2 being cash flow, earnings, etc., up. So now it goes from being a revenue growth story with no earnings to a slowing revenue growth story with accelerating earnings. So that's very different. Today is a very different day in terms of the prospective outlook for Amazon. That's why they had some difficulty explaining the guidance. The street looks fine with it because it's not like the blow up that Facebook was, but that doesn't mean that in 3 to 6 months from now, that people are like, wow, I'm buying a stock that's getting cheaper, but I'm not buying a stock that's showing accelerating revenue trends. Now, that's not to say that Amazon isn't sandbagging into their quarter, Jeremy, where they may show the biggest revenue acceleration in the history of Amazon, which would be great for them. But what if they don't? Okay, so we're at a very important juncture where the macro won't support revenue accelerating like it did for the last 8 quarters. So don't forget that either. So again, a really interesting time here for Amazon. I'm happy to buy it, sell it, short it, do whatever. But again, what I'd like to do is see it at the top end of its range today before I send out a sell signal. That's one thing. That's another reason why I think it oscillated between its range, because that's what it did. Isn't it amazing that people are like, well, I can't believe what Amazon's doing. Literally went to not even the low end of the range, but it's definitely going to test the top end of the range. And you'd be seller, even if you're a bull on Amazon, which we are, by the way, just officially. Brian McGough's been bullish on Amazon, Jeremy, the team, and rightly so. And by the way, everybody on Wall Street is, or at least they should have been. Yeah. So if you're long it, sell some today at the top end of the range. That's the way that you initially start to risk manage what I just walked through. The best way to start to risk manage a long that you've made a ton of money on is what? Book some gains, pay some taxes.